In light of the events that have happened in the last week, the readings today are so pertinent. The first lesson is from what is called 3rd Isaiah, beginning with chapter 56. Now you might just to remember you about Isaiah. It was written by 3 different authors. First Isaiah was the prophet in the 8th century to the northern kingdom. And it was during the time that Assyria was threatening to devour the northern kingdom, which in fact happened. And so the first prophet, Isaiah, the first 39 chapters, he denounces the oppression, the injustice that is going on in the kingdom as he observed it, and predicted that the Assyrians were going to come and devour them if they didn't change. And so it happened. Second Isaiah, which happens 200 or so years later, is during the time that the captivity in Babylon was going on. Some of the people had been left in their homeland, but a great number had been taken captive into Babylon. And it was a dreadful time, although some people thrived during that time. But they lamented the loss of their homeland and yearned to go back. And so the writer of 2nd Isaiah, chapter 40 through 55, promises deliverance, promises a return. It's a wonderful collection of lessons relating to those kind of promises. Chapter 56 begins after they had returned. And so we hear the beginning of that. Well, one major theological shift that happened to the Israelites during the captivity, as they encountered firsthand people of different ethnic origins, people of different religious traditions. And the broadening of that was to get an image that God was not just the God of us, but God was the God of everybody. And so we heard in the reading today from chapter 56 the images of a God who is a God for everybody. And it's even reaffirmed in the psalm we read together. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples, that is all the peoples, with equity, and guide all the nations upon earth. That's a different kind of image about God than what you hear earlier in the Old Testament. So it's clear from that latter part of the Old Testament that the Israelites began to think about their faith tradition as theirs, but they worshiped a God who was a God of lots of faith traditions. And that God demanded of them to love the stranger. That theme appears time after time. Well, in the events of this past week, we have been confronted again with the reality of racism in our country. And most of us good, white, liberal people say, I'm not a racist. Maybe you've said that to yourself. Maybe you've heard that. We can easily say, oh, people who are Ku Klux Klanners, or people who are ultra-right, people who are skinheads or neo-Nazis, those are racist, but not us. But maybe we ought to take a second look. Let me give you just a couple of examples where you might find racism lurking within you. Imagine walking down the street, downtown Grand Rapids, and you see a group of 4 white teenagers talking away, males, having a good time, and they're coming towards you. How do you react? Now imagine the same scene with a group of African American boys walking down the road towards you. How do you react? What goes on inside? Or a different kind of scenario. You're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off. You know how we get pissed off with that. And you find out as you go by, the person is white. Or you find out as you go by, the person is African American. What goes on inside of you in either of those scenarios? The reality is, we were all born in a racist culture. And racism is so deeply ingrained in our reality. So 3rd Isaiah is challenging that notion, that reality, because everybody tends to think, no matter what culture you grow up in, you think that we are it and those others are not. I grew up, as many of you know, in the Congo. The Mbun people were the group of people that we lived with. And there was a neighboring group called the Pende. Their cultures were almost identical. Their languages were a little different, but you could understand. And the rituals that they did were very similar. But my Mbun people would say, we are Bantu, meaning we are people. What did they say about the Pende? They're Basenjis. They're savages. That was the mindset that they had. And it is the kind of mindset that we all grow up with. We are it, we are part of God's chosen, those are not. So this kind of same confrontation happens in the gospel lesson. I'm going to only deal with the second part of the gospel lesson. After Jesus challenges the Pharisees because of their narrow-minded ritual laws, that's what's happening in the first part of the lesson. We're told that Jesus goes towards Tyre and Sidon. Is that the right word? Tyre and Sidon. I've got to get these words just right. Went to the district of Tyre and Sidon. This is going outside of the Israel area, going towards the coast, going into Gentile territory. And then he has this encounter with the Canaanite woman. Her name, by the way, doesn't appear here because she's not given a name. The biblical writers didn't generally give names to women because they weren't important. They gave names to men most of the time. So, in this encounter with this woman, she is first coming off of the side. I mean, Jesus is walking along with his 12 boys, and they're talking with each other, and she starts shouting, "Lord, Son of David." Two important titles. Lord is a recognition of superiority, but it also is a recognition of divinity. All all of the time in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is addressed as Lord, it's a recognition of his divinity. Son of David is, on the other hand, an acknowledgement of his Jewishness. And so she says, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. What does Jesus do? He ignores her. That's not the kind of Jesus we think, the Jesus who is a nice guy and does the right thing. He ignores her. And the disciples are getting a little vexed with this whole scene, because here is this woman, a Gentile woman, breaking all of the cultural barriers and hollering out at them. And they say to Jesus, send her away. Then she does. She breaks another barrier. She comes and kneels in front of him. And this time she doesn't do the Son of David business. She just says, Lord, have mercy on me. That's a powerful word. You remember in the Beatitudes, blessed are the merciful. Jesus came as one to give mercy, to bring mercy. And then we get the racism. What does Jesus say to her? It's not fair to throw the children's food to the dogs. Think of the different racist things that you might call somebody who's African American, or Hispanic, or any other group that's different. Here is Jesus calling this woman a dog. That's not a very nice thing to say. We'd call that now in our day racist, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Now, the woman stands her ground, or kneels her ground. She's kneeling in front of him. By the way, who knelt before Jesus earlier in the Gospel of Matthew who was not Jewish? Early on, right at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew? The three magi, are they Jewish? No. They come and kneel before the baby Jesus, or the toddler Jesus. So here it's happening again in the middle of Matthew, that non-Jews or non-Jewish woman is kneeling and acknowledging Jesus as Lord. So she responds by saying, but yes, even the crumbs from the table the dogs will eat. She doesn't get up and smack him for his racist comment. She gets into the conversation with him. She's tenacious because she wants mercy. She wants healing for her daughter who's demon-possessed. Now, this little exchange about the dogs, there's an interesting nuance of that. In this time, if a Jewish household had dogs, dogs were not allowed in the house. So if you were going to feed the crumbs of the table or bread or whatever to the dogs, you had to go outside and throw it to the dogs. A Gentile house, on the other hand, dogs were in the house. And if you fed the dogs, you would just put the stuff off the table, like your kids who are having to eat something and don't like it and they sneak it out of the dog. That's what they did. So there's that's Jesus' comment is relating to Jewish tradition, and hers is relating to Gentile tradition. And then here's the clincher, both for Jesus as well as for the outcome of the story. Jesus says, great is your faith. In the Gospel of Matthew, the people who are acknowledged for the greatness of their faith are almost always people who come for healing. Early on, the centurion's son or servant, remember that, chapter 8? The centurion says, my servant is paralyzed, and heal him. And they have an exchange with her. He does with Jesus. And at the conclusion of it, Jesus says, great is your faith. It happens about 4 or 5 times in the Gospel of Matthew. Faith, by the way, is not often when we do the Nicene Creed, we say, let us reaffirm our faith. It's not a belief system. Faith in the Greek understanding was steadfastness, faithfulness. It was commitment to a goal. And this woman was committed. She wanted mercy. She wanted healing for her daughter. Jesus says, great is your faith. Now, the other side of that is, you've heard the phrase, oh, ye of little faith. It happened just last week. Peter gets out of the boat, says, oh, let me walk to you. And then he starts to fall under the waves. And Jesus says, oh, you of little faith. And it happens 3 or 4 other times in the Gospel of Matthew. It's always the disciples who are the ones of little faith. Faith was what this woman demonstrated, was steadfastness. Now, how do we get all of this into who we are as the people of God? Well, the first thing I think we need to continue to challenge ourselves, to be open with ourselves, is to look at the racism that lurks within us. Before we get all self-righteous about those racists, we need to find out the amount, the extent, the degree of racism that lurks within our own hearts. And the second thing is, if we yearn for, if we seek a society where all people are affirmed and accepted, whether it's churches or our homes or our workplaces, it requires steadfastness. We have to be committed to the goal of an inclusive society, because that's really what the gospel is about. And it means challenging and confronting the issues of racism as they sort of raise their heads. Not just at a demonstration, but in our everyday lives. That's the faith that the Gospel of Matthew is about. That's the kind of faith that the woman from Cana demonstrated. Amen.